want to select either a one-sided or a two-sided setup. So keep in mind the handing is not at this point important. If you have a cabinet where you only have two doors that are bifolding together and then going to a pocket, you'll just select this two-door application. And if you have a four-door setup where you have two doors or two bifolding doors per pocket, then you'll select the second option here, 2x2. Let's click on the just single pocket setup for now. Click on next. Now it'll ask you for the handing, whether you want a left pocket or a right pocket. This is important. Keep in mind that you need to be specific to what your cabinet build is. All right. Our kits, our hardware kits, are very specific to what you're selecting and what you're inputting here. We'll keep the left for now. It's going to come back to the start of the configurator where you can see the 3D model. You can rotate around if you want to. You can see the difference between the single door pocket and the two-door bifolding pocket. And what I mean by the difference is not just your two doors here, but also the hardware that's within the pocket and then running across the top of your cabinet carcass. All right. This is the running track that is required for the trolley that is on the bifolding door. As that door comes out of the pocket, it needs to open up and swing around, and you have to have a trolley supporting that weight as it goes across and then into closed position and then back out again into open position and within the pocket. So it'll probably be easier to understand some of these dimensions with the 2D view. We recommend automatically going to, or not automatically, the first thing you do is going to the 2D view. You can zoom in and you can see the different dimensions that are required. You can get a better understanding of what these measurements are. Let's do a setup without the base panel. So we commonly see this type of application where whether you have two doors or four doors, you have your pocket here on this side and then your open space. And this might be representative of a, say, a stackable washer and dryer setup, where you've got your pocket on one side, you've got your washer and dryer, both stacked here, standing in the middle, and you want your doors to essentially go from floor to ceiling. Zoom back out. You can see everything. So let's select without base panel. This is what I am used to seeing often. Keep in mind that this is not just representative of a floor to ceiling application. You could also use this example, the without base panel option, if you have a folding Concepta sitting on top of base cabinets or a worktop. Just think of all of these measurements that you're inputting without your base hardware here, your base cabinets. So you'll know in your head that you have your base cabinets that are down here, but you don't need to worry about that right now as far as inputting the dimensions. Okay. Click on next. Let's do the push version for now. So keep in mind the push version is great for the doors being the edge of the doors when they're in open position being flush with your cabinet carcass, or the deeper portion of what forms your pocket. If you have handles and you want those doors to stick further out, then you'll want the pull version. Let's stick with push for now. It's going to ask you what color you want. This is important, and we'll go back to the 3D view, and I'll show you why. So we have two different color options for the front portion of what is visible, or the hardware that is visible when you have your doors in open position. So pushed back into the pocket. And you'll notice that you have a few different pieces of black hardware here. That is the portion that is in between the door, and this is just a trim or a fascia piece that kind of hides the bifolding hinges between the doors. And it just gives it a little bit nicer look. It's not really needed for the operation of the hardware, but this is what gives it a nice aesthetic when those doors are pushed back into the pocket. On the top portion here, you have the running track. And what is black is all of this hardware that goes across the top and as it curves back into the pocket. So if we change to the regular aluminum anodized, you'll notice that the color also changes on the 3D view. Now, these black pieces that you see back here that are still shaded in like this, these are just mounting plates. You're not going to see those, so don't worry about it. But you will see the trim fascia that's right here between the doors and then your running track. If you have a cabinet build that requires a very specific color, you can paint this hardware, the exterior side of your hardware. So powder coating is not really an option unless your powder coating team can really get into the inside of the track and cover it up to where none of that material gets inside. You want to make sure that if you are coloring or painting this, you do not get any paint, any powder coating, any kind of treatment on the inside running portion of the track. If you get material in there where that trolley is supposed to be rolling back and forth, it's going to cause you problems. All right, just keep that in mind. So we'll stick with the plain aluminum anodized. So click on next. So you can plan around the overall size of your cabinet carcass, or you can plan around the size of your doors if you know exactly what size your doors are supposed to be. Now I'm going to go back to the 2D view here so you can see these measurements. Okay. We'll zoom in here. The SH measurement, or the cabinet height measurement, is the height of your pocket, or more specifically, the furthest extent of where your hardware is going to be installed. And I'm going to show you a different view here. This needs to be explained a little bit better as far as a more detailed view, I think. So your SH value is the same as what your EH value is here. It's just the height of where your hardware is going to be installed. And it's not necessarily in this case for Folding Concepta where you're measuring from the top of your running track to the bottom of your bottom guide. It is instead what would be measured for the cabinet carcass, right? And you can see that if you go to any of our other details on our catalog or installation instructions, you can see this EH measurement is measuring not where the hardware is, but where the box that is positioning the hardware is, right? So you'll see that there is a difference between where these connecting brackets go at the top and at the bottom. And the bottom can be somewhat finagled, but the top is always going to be set. And I'll explain that here. The top, you have to have this bracket that goes across and spans from side to side within the pocket. And that is because this is forming essentially a structural component, let's say maybe a structural beam. And this is the bracket here that I'm talking about is this dark shaded portion that spans from side to side and holds and hangs the hardware. This whole thing is required. You cannot only install one side of this bracket. This bracket comes apart. It's a two-piece assembly, and it's got a spline in there. I'm not going to go into depth about that right now because we can explain that in a detailed installation video. But this spline, if you take it out, these back brackets will come apart. Now, that part is required. You cannot change that. And I'm trying to point that out because on the bottom, you've got another metal bracket, and it's a two-piece assembly, sort of, that this is essentially a metal U-channel, is kind of what it looks like. It forms the bottom bracket. This might be pushed all the way down to the floor if you had a floor-to-ceiling installation. And you'll notice that there has to be some kind of clearance here between the bottom bracket and the bottom of your door. This portion that I'm now highlighting is the same thing as what you'll see in our connector kits for the single door. It's just a heavy duty plastic clip that is installed to the outer panel and allows you to kind of swing in and kick in your outer panel and click it into place. This bottom bracket here, this bottom clip, is not necessarily required for Folding Concepta, but you still have to have your outer panel that forms your pocket in order to give you a structural piece for that bracket. So a lot of explanation for a very small portion of the configurator here. So we'll input a value of 2 meters for the SH value. You'll notice that that value here changes, updates. Let's do a cabinet width of 1 meter, 1,000 millimeters. Your next value that we just changed to 1 meter, 1,000 millimeters, is measured from the outer extents of your cabinet, and that includes your pocket. So it includes the panel that forms the outer extent, and it includes the pocket. The cabinet depth, our ST value, is the full depth of your cabinet. With Folding Concepta, you have to have a bigger difference from what would be your box within a box. And by that, I mean you have to have an allowance for the running track that we were talking about earlier with the different colors. And that is so that when you have your doors in the pocket, so you got your outer folding door and then you got your inner bifolding door, right? This bifolding door, as it pulls out of the pocket, it has to swing outward right here. So you have to have a clearance for that door to swing. And that's where you get this difference between the outer carcass and your inner box. And that measurement is always fixed. It is always 75 millimeters or just shy of 3 inches. And then that value is also going to determine what your difference is between your outer pocket panel and your inner pocket panel based off of the thickness of your door. You can see these values here. So you got 75 millimeters plus your door thickness in order to get from your outer pocket panel to your inner pocket panel. So when you're looking at your ST measurement, keep that in mind. This is going to be the full depth of your entire build. So let's just say, for example, you have 700 millimeters for the full depth of your cabinet. You'll notice that this changes to 700 when you put that value in. We're going to go to another portion of the views here so that we can look at M. This M2 value, what it's called out as for Folding Concepta, is the value that is again measured just like the single door pocket, measured from the inner or less deep portion of what forms your pocket or panel that forms your pocket to the edge of your doors, right? So this is, right now, you get a default measurement for a pull handle here. You can always install a pull handle here. But if you wanted to install a pull handle on both doors in the same position for aesthetics, then obviously you'd want your door to stick out further, right? So keep in mind that that measurement is measured from the inner panel to where your door edge is going to be. So if you want to make this stick further out, you have to include that 75 millimeters plus your door thickness that we just talked about. So let's say we have a value of 150 here. In order to pull your doors further out for another handle on this side, and let's go back to what we talked about in the single door setup. If you have a handle that has to be installed here, we recommend the pull version of our hardware, not the push. If you want to push your doors all the way into the pocket and have the edge of your doors in open position be flush with the exterior carcass, then you'll want to, put your values here in for M such that your doors are flush there, and you still have an allowance for a handle on this side if you really need it. But that's the best setup for the push option, meaning you push on your doors. So if your doors are folded together and slid into the pocket all the way, you push on them, and the hardware kicks it out and ejects it out automatically after you push. So going back to what we recommend here, if you have a handle, we recommend the pull version of the hardware. If you do not have a handle, then we recommend the push version of our hardware. All right. So that's the M value there. Click on next. This is selecting the material options for your door and your door thickness. This is, as we explained in the single door video, this is important so that the system can estimate how much your doors are going to weigh. And if you're trying to plan for some very large doors and some very dense material, the system will say your doors are too heavy and will not allow you to continue. You need to make some kind of modification to your system. And whether you change just the density that you're working with, and in your head, I'm going to make sure that my doors are underweight, or I'm going to use some kind of honeycomb core, or whatever the situation is. If you know that you can get your doors to below the weight limitation, then just play with this as needed for whatever material you're selecting. So what I mean by that is if you choose the individual option here, all that's really meaning is that it's letting you input a manual value for the density of your wood or the material that you're making the doors out of. So you can kind of finagle this, and you can say, I've only got a density of 500 kilograms per metric or per cubic meter, right? And then you can kind of just fool the system into thinking you're within weight limitations. For now, we're going to select the MDF. Click on next. I'm going to zoom out so you can see an overview again. This is the input values here for the cabinet carcass. This is for your side walls, your pocket walls. We're going to leave things as 19 millimeters here, but I'll go in and explain what's what. All right, we'll zoom in here to the floor plan view. You can see all these different values. AS is the thickness of your outer panel or your deeper panel that forms the pocket. I'm going to leave that as 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch. BS is the inner panel that forms the pocket. I'm going to also leave that at 19 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch. GS is the opposite side. So if you have just for Folding Concepta a 2-door configuration, you'll obviously have the outer portion of what forms that carcass. That is the thickness here. If you have a 4-door application where you have 2 doors on one side, one pocket, 2 doors, say, on the left-hand pocket, and then 2 doors on, say, a right-hand pocket, and 4 doors coming together to meet in the middle, you will not have this panel, right? You're then going to have, we'll zoom in here to an elevation view. So you get a elevation view over on this side, but more importantly, what we're looking for is the KDS value, and this is just the panel that forms the top of your carcass. I'm going to change that so you can see it changing and updating. So you'll see KDS then changing to 25 here, or an inch. Change it back to 19 just so we can keep all of these at 3/4 of an inch. RS. RS is the thickness of your back panel. So maybe you've got only 1/4 of an inch thick back panel. Maybe you've got a 1/2 inch. So we put maybe 12 millimeters there for a 1/2 inch thick back panel. And you'll see that these values, this RS value is changing. And then the inset value as well. So I'm going to go to a 3D view here. I think it's easier to understand what these values are of this back panel and the inset value are by looking at the 3D image. We'll have to give it a second because we've changed some of the values. That whole 3D model is also automatically changing. We'll rotate that around. Let's see if we can get a good view of this. Yeah, there we go. All right, so you can kind of see the difference in the shading here. What it's trying to represent here is this back panel and then the difference between what would be, say, your pocket depth. So you can see how your pocket depth is allowing for the full measurement front to back here within the pocket, which is forming the positioning or the placement of your cabinet carcass, right? Well, maybe you don't want the inner depth of your cabinet where your drawers and shelving to be the same depth as your pocket. This is where you can change that dimension. So you can input the value of how thick your panel, your back panel is, and then you can also change the offset of that panel. So right now, this is set at 32, just based off of the measurements that I've input. But we can change that value to, say, 12, and then make that back panel flush with your cabinet carcass. And you might think that that value should be 0 in order to make it flush, but that's all just determined by where you're measuring from. And our system is measuring from the back side here to the inner side of that panel. So if we had a 1/2 inch panel and we wanted that panel to be offset to change the depth of where shelving is, we can then say, come in here and change that offset, or the rear panel inset is what it's called, RE value, to say maybe 100 millimeters or 4 inches. And now you can more clearly see where these measurements are differentiating from. So you got your thickness of your panel and then how much this is offset. And I wanted to go into more depth here because some people just kind of get confused with where these measurements are being positioned from or taken from. All right. Zoom back out here. We'll click on next. This is now the gaps and reveals. And I'll zoom in here so you can get a view of the variable or acronyms that are being used for this. So you have your Z1, top gap, Z2, bottom gap. You have a Z3, which is the outer gap, Z4, opposite side gap, and Z5, the door gap space. And I'm going to go into a little bit of an explanation as to what each one of these is. So your top gap, Z1, as you change that, you'll notice that you only have a certain value that you can, or certain range that you can select from. You can set that to 0 or up to 1/4 of an inch, 6 millimeters. So let's do 0, and you can see that this measurement then goes away, meaning that your doors are fully overlaying the top panel of your cabinet carcass. I'm going to change that back to 3, just so you can see it. And I'm going to zoom out here and show you kind of a real simplified overview. If you're looking into your pocket, you can see kind of the hidden lines back here with your door overlaying or in closed position. You can see now the difference between the top of your door and the top of your cabinet carcass, right? That is the Z1 measurement. The bottom gap, like the single door option, is set at a minimum of 10 millimeters. So if you, let's say we want exactly half of an inch here. We can change that value. Maybe we want some kind of gap between the floor, if our floor is uneven, or we have some kind of other trim piece that's going to go here on in between the bottom of the door and your worktop or your cabinet top. You can increase that value. You cannot change it to anything less than 10 millimeters because of the brackets that we were looking at earlier. So because you have to have a clearance between the bottom of your door and where these brackets sit, you're always going to have a 10 millimeter minimum 10 millimeter measurement within our system planner. This can be finagled a little bit. If you push your bottom bracket down all the way to the floor, then obviously, as you can see here, you can decrease your gap if you change the size of your doors to a quarter of an inch or 6 millimeters. Our system planner or system configurator will not allow for that, but just keep that in mind. You can adjust your measurements, adjust the height of your door, adjust the positioning of your hardware as needed. Your outer gap. All right, your outer gap measurement, let's just change that to a value of 3 so you can see it changing here at Z3. So Z3 now equals 3 millimeters or an eighth of an inch. And let me show you a kind of a better detail of what this measurement is. So your Z3 measurement is just simply the gap that you have between the panel, the outer panel that forms the pocket, and the edge of your door when in closed position. All right. So that's Z3. Z4 is the opposite side. We'll change that to 3. Say you want an eighth of an inch here, 3 millimeters. Your Z4 measurement is the opposite side. So if you have just a 2-door application where you've got a cabinet carcass that's going out and forming the opposite panel on the opposite side from the pocket, your Z4 measurement is this side. So you have your overview of a 2-door application. Your Z4 measurement is the opposite reveal here between the outer panel and the edge of the door. Your Z5 measurement is the gap that you have in between the 2 doors. So we'll change that to 3. You'll see that it's updating here. Z5 now equals 3. And that measurement you'll see here on our catalog sheets, our installation details, is right there. You can see the value here, the range, and it is this gap between the 2 doors. All right. So now that we got our reveals all selected, you can click on next. So just like the single door application, our system is then going to ask you for what color you want for the door straighteners. And it will not give you an option to not use door straighteners. If you're not going to use our door straighteners, don't worry about it. Just make a selection and move on. It's not important. But keep in mind that the details that we provide for door straighteners are specific to our door straighteners. If you purchase door straighteners from somebody else or a different brand, that's totally fine. But you need to follow that manufacturer's cutting and mortising details, not ours. So we'll leave it on the black anodized aluminum selection for now. Now you get to the portion where it's asking you what files you want. This is the planning, the 2D installation plan and the PDF installation plan. That's just the PDF documents that you get showing you the parts list and then all the different details showing you the measurements that are specific to your build. The 3D step file is a 3D STEP file or STP file if you have the capability to open that and view it and edit it. We'll select on that for now. If you select this, and after you input your contact information, give it a little bit longer to form your files. Now it's asking you for a name of your configuration. We'll say Hawa training for now. Whatever you call this doesn't really matter. This is specific to either you or your project so that you have a unique identifier on the printouts. Click on next. Then it's going to ask you for your contact information, for your email address. It is important to put an accurate email address in here because it's going to email you those files. We'll click on next. And then the final selection here is for the terms that you agree to it, just to using the configurator file, our configurator tool here. And then you'll click on generate data.